Hey, thanks for being on with me today. It's Michelle here, your host for our brand new Creating Super Kids series. I am so excited today to have Coach Mark on with me. He is a veteran coach of 17 years experience as a collegiate basketball coach. He has worked with athletes, coaches, trainers at the professional, collegiate level, NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, you name it, US track and field, CrossFit athletes, that's near and dear to my heart as I'm married to one, and numerous other athletes. So, Mark, thank you so much for being on today. I am really excited for this episode of Creating Super Kids.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome. So, my first question to kick into it is talking about nature versus nurture. In your experience, coach, how much of an athlete's success is influenced by their natural talent versus their environment and the training that they receive from coaches?
It's both. You have to have some natural ability. If you have zero coordination, can't walk and chew gum at the same time, it's going to be hard to be a good athlete. But a lot of it is really non-athletic skills to succeed at kind of what I would say the college or professional level. Um,
Mm.
you know, Part of the nature nurture thing is your kids are who they're created to be, and they're set in a certain way. And if they have athletic ability, that's a great start. If they don't, it doesn't mean they still can't succeed. Um, but we've got this huge ability to have some things that we normally wouldn't look for as youth parents or youth coaches at the collegiate level that really don't have anything to do with athletic ability. And I always looked at competitiveness, toughness, and drive as three of the characteristics that stood out to me the most, regardless of athletic ability or talent.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I think, I don't know if it's just because we live here in South Florida. There's a lot of professional athletes, kids down here. It is very
Yep.
competitive. And one of the things that I'm always curious is what are coaches watching for in that early potential? Scotty Scheffler, I think, is a great example. They said that they saw it in him at age 4, Tiger Woods. I mean, Serena Williams, the list goes on and on and on. What do you advise for parents at a healthy level watching to see if their kids has natural ability?
Yeah, Scotty Scheffler is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up because you would look at his swing with his dragging of his back foot and say, "Oh, a coach would immediately correct that in a junior player. They wouldn't allow that to happen." And his coach said, "Well, when he came to me, he was already a great golfer. Why would I change that little one move with a foot?" But as parents, we try so hard to coach that out of our 8, 9, 10-year-old kid because that's not a correct golf swing. So that part of it, I kind of throw to the side. If they've got basic athletic ability, I'm really, when I was recruiting at the collegiate level and I was watching high school kids play, I watched their demeanor on the bench, how they reacted to teammates, how they reacted to coaches, how they reacted to referees, what happened when they missed a shot, what happened when something negative happened, what was their kind of response to that. I watched their competitiveness. I like going to practice. I'm going to watch a kid in practice and how they compete against their teammates and in every drill rather than just a game. I would talk to teachers about the kid off the court and find out if they had a good attitude, if they were a good classmate, if they were good, not just a teammate, how they reacted in class to their work. I always wanted to see if they were driven. When practice ended and the coach said, "Okay, everybody, time to go home," did they stay and do extra on their own? So I was always looking at things other than the physical abilities and talent. Are they important? For sure. But where you really have those collegiate and professional level athletes standing, when you take what they've got with his basic talent and do they take that to the next level with those off the court things that we think are not as important, but I think are vitally important.
Yeah, no, I think that's great for parents to hear. And so when you talk about scouting at that high school level and what you were looking for, what did you see among the athletes that were really thriving, that were naturally competitive? And how were their parents either pushing them, guiding them, nurturing them? Like, what was that different landscape of parenting and those athletes that you saw at that next level that you knew you were going to recruit? Were their parents pushing them,
Yeah,
nurturing them? What's the difference?
yeah, I would never say push. Push was if the parent had to push them and they weren't driven themselves and they weren't seeking it out and looking for extra practice and wanting to do it and saying, hey, I want to go do this, and the parent were having to drag them in the car or drag them in the van, they've got to have that self-directed motivation that allows them to succeed. Can the parents guide that for years? If you've got somebody there that's helping, that's assisting, that's an advantage, and there's going to be extra things there. The other thing is I encourage parents just to get involved. Parents say, well, I'm not a good athlete myself. How do I help my young athlete in their sport? I'm not any good. They don't care. Number one, your kid, your son or your daughter would rather spend time playing or batting practice and taking grounders with you than a major league player. Yeah, they're going to be cool with major, but they want to spend time with you. Your ability to do that, I don't know, it just went viral a couple weeks ago. They had an a NFL rookie who's the snapper. I think it's for the Cowboys, but he's the long snapper. And over the summer, his mom stood behind him and called the plays while he would long snap to her. She has zero athletic ability. She can barely catch the ball, but all he needed was somebody, it was a target that he could snap the ball at, and he ended up making the Cowboys team as the long snapper. Pretty good story, but he didn't go get a professional coach to help him do that. He just had his mom. And that's a college athlete. It's not even a little kid. So that ability to work with your kids and support them, but I was always looking for kids who were self-motivated and self-driven, who didn't need to be drugged to practice.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And on that topic, something that I wanted to ask you about, I can only speak for myself when I was growing up. We went outside and played sports. We didn't have video games. We didn't have these fancy play dates that were arranged or, these huge training facilities. They just didn't exist where I grew up. So you went out and you went to the fields, you went to the basketball courts, and you just played. What would you say it's a natural evolution that can't be stopped, but let's face it, Little League sports leagues is a big, big business. So I know, at least in my experience, my daughter's a golfer. So we have to get her out golfing, but it's expensive and it's a lot of time and it's a lot of money. And I would say the same for travel soccer, travel basketball. I mean, there is just a lot of time and money now put in these big businesses. Do you see a change in the athlete's trajectory towards being a multi-sport athlete in having to choose too soon and narrow the path too soon? Is it a negative, a positive, neutral? Like, what is your peripheral, and perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've raised two sons. They're now 29 and 26. My oldest played three sports: basketball, baseball, football. My younger one played baseball and football. And then was skating and X Games and anything you could jump off of with a skateboard, he was jumping. I always liked athletes who played everything. When it's baseball season, you play baseball. When it's basketball season, you play basketball. When it's football season, you play football, because you're well-rounded. You have to move in different ways other than the one way your sport makes you move. And being able to move your body and muscles and the kinesiology infected in different ways is going to help you in all sports. So I think we've lost part of that well-rounded athlete that I grew up with. Same thing. I played everything. And whenever that season was in, that's what I was playing, and I put it away and went on to the next one. But now we have these one-sport athletes. The funny thing is, you see all these massive injuries in youth athletes because they only play one sport. They only are made to move in one way. And then we make an athletic move that's not in the pattern that they're so used to because they haven't moved in other ways. They have these injuries, and it just it came out of nowhere. No, you've been moving in just these patterns for so long and not these other patterns, and now your body has to do something that you're not used to, and that's where injuries occur. So I always liked people, even as a basketball coach, I'd rather have that kid playing football and playing baseball and rather than year-round basketball, because they were more well-rounded. Plus, you get different influences. The baseball culture is radically different than the basketball culture. Right? Mm-hmm. In basketball, you show up, you put in your time, and you leave after practice. In baseball, you show up early to get the field ready, and then you practice, and then you have 30, 40 minutes as a player of field work after the game. Like, it's a completely different culture as far as your work ethic and other things and what you're expected to do and you're not catered to. So I liked multiple sports. It is expensive, but you know what? Tony Finau is one of the best golfers in the world, and his parents couldn't afford to take him to the range and couldn't take him to practice. So they put up a mattress in the garage, and he hit thousands and thousands of balls a week into a mattress with no feedback other than, did that swing feel good, and did I hit a spot on the mattress I tried to hit? And now he's a pro golfer. So you don't have to have those things. Do they help? For sure. They're accelerators, but they're not the be all end all.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because the one thing that I was going to ask you is about that 10,000 hours marker that a lot of experts talk about to be at the height, at the peak of your field and your niche. So I think that example of Tony is really important, because my question back to you with the multi-sport athlete is, at least down here in South Florida, the coaches really do hyper segment you into that sport for their own profit, for their own focus, sometimes for just the ease of having that kid in that one sport. So does that stymie reaching that 10,000 mark point, or like you're saying in baseball, it allows them to actually gain more skill going into different sports towards that 10,000 hour mark?
Yeah, the 10,000 hour mark is important, but again, we started with a couple parameters. It doesn't matter if I take a youth who is not coordinated, doesn't have physical ability, doesn't have a gift for the picture sport, and I apply 10,000 hours. They're still not going to be one of the best at it. They're still not going to be a collegiate athlete, a professional athlete. You do have some physical parameters. We're taught that we teach kids, if you can believe it, you can achieve it, no matter what. No, not always. Sorry. And the funny thing is, as parents, is at the collegiate level, I've watched a lot of youth sports, and I see a lot of parents trying to live vicariously through their kids. Well, I didn't achieve this, so you're going to achieve it. And the parents get caught up in the kid's athletic ability, and the kid may not be good enough, right? Kids can't decide when the rods and cones in their eyes form fully so they can see and hit a baseball better than another kid who's the same 11-year-old, right? Why can my kid hit a baseball and your kid can't? Probably at that point has nothing to do with their ability in the long term. It has to do with how fast their body has developed, and they cannot control that. As we get older, yes, those things happen, but if you still don't have the physical ability and you shove kids into that place, you're going to have a broken kid, right? And we see this in if your kid, my older son is a really good athlete, more introverted, more quiet. My younger one is a really good athlete, but really extroverted and outgoing. If I had tried to shove them into roles of being outspoken and being a leader when he didn't want to be, my older one was a leader just because how he played, but he didn't have to talk. My young one was a talker and real out in front and a leader, but they were very different. So shoving them into the roles that you see them for, if you've got a kid who's real techie and likes to be an introvert and in a room, and he's really good at tech, and you shove him into being a public speaker and an athlete and he doesn't want to be, you're going to have a messed up kid. Flip side, if you shove a kid who's a good athlete and outspoken leader and not techie at all, like I am not techie, if it's a software issue, I'm out. Like if you shove them into that role of, well, you're gonna design computer programs for a living, you're gonna have a frustrated person, right? So the same thing in sports. You can't shove them into roles they weren't meant for. God has given me the ability to see as I raise kids, right? Train them up the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. That doesn't necessarily mean right and wrong. That's not really what that verse is about. It's about, I understand the way my child is wired, and I'm going to encourage them to flourish in that area. Doesn't mean that I can't help them in other areas they're not as good in, but I'm going to encourage the path they take. I'm going to do as best I can to guide them, let them choose, but guide them in a way that they're gifted and strengthened. And that's the best path for them.
Yeah, it's so good. And Mark, what age would you say that really starts to appear? And I know it can be different, like we talked about Tiger or Tony or those, really elite athletes, but on average, when would that natural talent and interest really start to show, where parents can start honing in to nurture that innate genius?
Pretty early, really. I mean, you see things in your child as a 2 or 3-year-old that you reflect back on when they're 17, 18, go, hey, we saw this when they were 2 or 3. Like the first, how soon they started walking. Our friends Nick and Stephanie Rodsetter, right, have come up with this incredible tool to help kids start crawling and functioning and moving better. And
Yeah.
pediatricians say, well, they're born with the ability to crawl, but then they lose it for 3 or 4 months and they get it back. And no, they lose it because you put them in car seats, you put them in stuff that you're not encouraging that, so they have to regain it. So you can see right away. And if you've ever watched Nick and Stephanie's boys play sports, you'll know very early on that they had something different. They developed much faster and much earlier. But you can see whether it's physical ability or mental or personality or leadership or ingenuity. I mean, my younger one, when he was 5 or 6, was taking Legos. Back then, Legos were square blocks. They didn't have all these moving wheels and curved parts. And he would take a lighter and melt them and shape them and create these creations that Lego never meant to be made. So we could see his mind worked in a level that our older sons didn't, and mine didn't, and my wife's didn't, but like my brother and my grandfather did. Very architecture, very engineering. So we could see that very early on, and that's kind of how his mind works. So you'll be able to see that early on. But again, it doesn't mean that's the be-all, end-all. If your kids' rods and cones in their eyes haven't formed and they're really terrible at hitting a baseball, they may get really, really good at it. And they may be professional baseball players someday. It's just that part of their brain and their body hasn't developed yet. So the physical development is the part you can't control. But you'll see the natural gifts, the natural talents, the natural personality. You'll start to see some of those things pop up. And I think as early as 1 or 2 or 3.
Wow, that's amazing. That is incredible. One of my favorite questions, Mark, that I actually asked my girls' school principal at North Broward Preparatory School, I said, Principal Kathleen, what is the difference between those kids that you see really fly, are fulfilled, are thriving when they graduate, versus those kids that just never quite take flight and are going to stay status quo, never really soar? And she said the number one differentiator that I see is that the kids that are soaring have a lot of fun with their family, and it's not all academic and it's not all sports based, and they're just having a lot of fun as a family, and they're very well connected to themselves and their self-confidence and through their family. So I want to ask you that same thing. You know, you and I didn't get a lot of time to discuss this, but I actually worked in professional sports for 10 years of my life. And so I got to see and know a lot of different types of athletes in multiple different industries of sport. And it was really fascinating to watch because every single industry, I worked for the PGA, the NHL, the NBA, every one of them is different, and those athletes are different. So I would love to hear from you. What do you see in the families and the home environments of those players that you coached over 17 years that really thrive? And I don't just mean in winning, I mean winning in life. And those players that just never quite soared, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, a stable home is huge. Again, it's a different world than I grew up in. That was the number one factor is, are there a mom and dad in the home? Is it stable? Is it loving? Do they do things outside of sports? Is it balanced? I think David Robinson was one of my favorite basketball players, favorite athletes. His mom and dad wrote a book called Raising an Admiral, right? Now, David was 7 foot tall and had some freak physical abilities, but he still had to be raised correctly and respectful and to understand competitiveness and fair play and honesty. I had a book, a series called Raising a Modern Day Knight about raising young sons, and then I took both my boys through that series. So the stable home is a huge part of it. That doesn't mean it always has to be the same. I've seen very stable one-parent homes, whether it's just a dad or just a mom.
Yep.
I've seen very stable homes where there's no parent involved. It's the aunt and uncle or grandparents that are raising the kid. We just need that stability to launch the launch pad off of. And here's the problem where you see it crop up, where it really manifests. Talent can get you there, talent alone. Now, talent is not enough, the great book by John Maxwell, but talent can get somebody to the collegiate or professional level. I got a book by Donald Miller called To Own a Dragon, and it was what it was like being raised as a boy in a single parent home. And until I read that book, I had no concept for how boys, men, young men raised in single parent homes viewed me as a leader, viewed me as a man, and viewed me as a coach. And it really created a paradigm shift in how I spoke to them, how I talked to them, how I encouraged them, how I disciplined them, versus somebody that was raised the way I was raised. And it blew my mind, but it really helped me too, because it it allows you to have an insight that I didn't have before that. So the stability of the home is huge. The ability to do things outside of sports, right? If the only time I've seen kids that were raised in a stable home, two parents, but the only time they interacted with their dad was sports. Outside of sports, the dad didn't interact with the son or the daughter. They didn't talk to him. They didn't talk to him about anything in sports. It was all dry. And the great one is Todd Marinovich. I don't know if you remember Todd Marinovich, who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated as Robo Quarterback. He'd never had sugar.
Yep.
He'd never done anything wrong. His dad raised him with a psychological coach, a football coach, a throwing coach, a weight coach, everything. He goes to
Yep.
USC and has a major worldwide meltdown, and then in the NFL never makes it. Stable home, but the only thing he ever talked with his dad about was football. They had no other relationships outside of that. So the home environment is critical beyond talent.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because that was my next question. And those players that you saw at the collegiate level that you've recruited that obviously had talent, that you saw that had potential, you know, did you encourage the athletes to learn different mindset work? Did you encourage them to have fun? Did you encourage them to just stay in the basketball paradigm? What did you encourage for the best results that you saw as a coach?
Yeah, so like as if, later on in my career, I wish I did this earlier, but later in my career, as if my players didn't have enough classwork to do, I assigned each player a book per semester to read that I chose for them based on their personality, what I think they needed, right? Almost none of them were books about sports or written by athletes or written for athletes. They were things written by Navy SEALs and leaders and getting outside of their own athletic perspective. You mentioned TV earlier. When I was a kid, there was a period of time where my dad took the TV, unplugged it, and stuck it in a closet for 3 years. We didn't watch TV for 3 years. So that was before cell phones. I went to the library to Walden Books or B. Dalton Books every week with my allowance, and I bought books and I read and I played outside and I read. That's what I did. And then I think we took it back out for the Olympics. Probably shouldn't even done that because then it never went back. But if you look at high achievers in our society, multimillionaires, they don't watch TV and they're not on social media, right? What is every
Yeah.
athlete, high school athlete right now, constantly on social media and watching TV
Yeah.
and it's just this distraction that pulls them away. So I wanted different perspective. I also roomed guys on the road that didn't get along. I wanted guys of different
Wow.
backgrounds, different beliefs, different socioeconomic thing. I wanted them to learn how to converse with somebody they didn't relate to and learn from that culture, learn from that background, learn from that childhood, learn from whatever was going forward.
Yeah.
So you've got to constantly influence and push kids into things that are uncomfortable for them, not dangerous, but uncomfortable, that help them stretch and grow.
That's so interesting. I really was blessed to work with a lot of amazing professional basketball players. I don't know if it's something that the league did. I mean, I had David Stern at the helm when I was there, or if it's just the basketball culture in general, but they were amazing to work with. So I'm curious, you know, what you would say in some of your favorite players outside of basketball, inside of basketball, to role model the path that their parents nurtured them in. I mean, obviously, Serena and
Yeah.
Venus Williams are two of my favorite to look at their dad's nurture. I mean, it's kind of what you're talking about, Tony. They didn't have all the best facilities. Their dad was out there self-taught teaching them. So, what are
Yeah.
some of the other role model of parents and that family culture that you would say parents should study that want super achievers, that want to create super kids and super families?
Yeah. I'd go back to the two books I mentioned, David Robinson's parents, the book Raising an Admiral, and kind of how we did it. I mean, obviously, yes, 7 foot and athletic helps, but the kind of man he was and is what they're really talking about. If you're a father with boys, the series Raising a Modern Day Knight, I think is critical. for that. Yeah, just that direction and encouragement. Dirk Nowitzki was one of my favorites, but he's also very
Yeah.
unique. Grew up in Germany, different culture. Grew up playing tennis, not basketball. He wasn't very good at basketball when he first started. They thought he was going to be a super tennis player, and he still plays a lot of tennis. Um,
Yes.
Dirk Dirk is the only player, and this has with have to do how he was raised. He's the only player in the modern NBA era to play his entire career without an agent. He never had an agent represent him in contract talks. He would walk in with Mark Cuban. He'd say, "My contract's up," and they would negotiate a deal. They'd shake hands, they'd sign it, and that was it. He never held out. He never asked for more money. In fact, near the end of his career, he structured his contract to make less money so they could get other players and win a championship because that's what he wanted to do, right? So that's a very unique in the get what you can, get it now, get what you're worth world. That's very, very different. But when I dealt with Dirk, he was always very different as a person. He was very kind. He was very humble. He was very genuine. He was much more interested in you than talking about him. He was very unique. So players like that have been raised in a different culture, I think, is a big impact as well. Um, my favorite
Yeah.
awards are each pro sport has an award that's based on your character, right? So in golf, it's the uh, I just went blank. The SMU golfer, Payne Stewart. It's the Payne Stewart Award, right? Those are my favorite awards. And there's the Jim Thorpe Award, right? All these awards have nothing to do with athletic ability. They have to do with your character and who you are as a person. So books like that, those guidelines that you have, getting your kid out of the sports brain and world, and giving them into culture. You know what? When our boys were little, we took them to Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera. Like, I loved it. I became such a fan, and now we've gone to Broadway and watched Wicked and all kinds of musicals we've seen. So we exposed our kids to that very early,
I
not
love it.
sports at all. And guess what? Now they both have a love for it. They went and saw Les Mis together, the two of them, my two sons. Like they thought that was cool, right? So getting kids exposed to different things is critical.
So you mentioned Dirk. I mean, we talked about some of the greatest athletes in our history. What would you say is the difference in either parenting, coaching, self between being competitive and being a jerk?
Huge. Competitiveness was the number one thing I looked for, right? I wanted to see a kid not just compete on the basketball floor, compete in the classroom, compete to be a great teammate, to compete to see who could be the first to pick up trash off the floor, right? Be first in everything. Competitiveness was huge. Um, I had a problem in that I was a perfectionist as an athlete, and my competitiveness often overflowed into being a jerk, like not off the floor, but on the floor. I would elbow you in the face. I would
Mm-hmm.
knock you out of the way. I would talk a little
Yep.
trash. I wanted to win so badly. As I aged, I mellowed. But there's a fine line there. But it's not just competitiveness. The things I looked at were competitiveness, drive. Drive was huge. I wanted to see kids that were motivated to do it on their own and without somebody pushing them or making them. Um, Dennis Rodman, for all his critiques, and he is a broken guy, but nobody ever had to push Dennis Rodman to work hard. When the San Antonio Spurs got him, they were stunned at how hard he worked, and they couldn't keep up with him. He was out there doing things in the off season. They wanted to work out with him, and they couldn't. They couldn't do what he was
Wow.
doing. It was so physically demanding. But nobody made that guy do it. He did it on his own. I don't think he got enough credit for that. Um, but the transition of making sure they have a stable home, making sure they're exposed to teachers, making sure they're respectful of other people translates to that line where they know the difference between competitiveness and crossing the line into being a jerk. You can be competitive, you can play hard. Um, I want somebody to be aggressive enough to knock a player down, but then I want him to reach out and help him up, pat him on the back, and move on to the next play for sure. Um, it's hard
Now,
to
interesting
know.
that you say,
Yeah,
I'm curious what you would say too, raising your own two sons, and you were very vulnerable and authentic about your own competitiveness crossing that line. Is that something that they're learning from mom and dad? Or is that something just inside of them that mom and dad need to keep an eye on?
Both. I mean, both. Um, my older son got my personality to a T, and he controlled it better than I did. My younger son has my wife's personality. He was a really good athlete, but he played for the camaraderie and whatever the snack was at halftime or after the game and to be there. And if his friends were going to play soccer that year, he was going to play soccer that year. If they weren't, he wasn't real interested. My older son was like, in youth sports, when they start out in soccer, they don't keep a score. And what's the score? And they'd say, oh, we tied. And Will would say, no, it was 3-2. We won. And the coach would say, no, 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 we tied. Aiden was like, what's the snack? I don't care what the score was, right? So very, very different. I think it's both. I think your kids learn who you are, right? They model what they see. And if they see dad blow his temper all the time, they're going to be more apt to blow their temper. And it's one thing when I blow my temper. It feels completely different when I watch my son do exactly the wrong thing that he saw me do, right? If whatever comes out of your mouth is all well and good until it comes out of your 4-year-old's mouth, and then it's not quite as cute or quite as funny. So the modeling we do for our kids cannot be understated. Our kids model us. Yes, they have their own personalities, and yes, they're responsible for their own choices. I don't get to say, well, I blew my temper because my dad had a temper. No, that may be a reason, but it's not an excuse. That's your choice and your decision, and you're responsible for that. But they are definitely going to model what they see. If you've had a child for any length of time, you understand they repeat what they see and hear, and sometimes to our embarrassment in public.
Yeah. So my next question is, as coaches, I think there's so many of us around here that volunteer to coach our kids. And, obviously I think our local sports league has like 4,000 teams or 4,000 kids competing this year, and they need all the parents that they can get. Yeah. So my question about coaching is this. I called every single golf facility to take on my 7-year-old golfer that was showing interest, and no one would take on a little girl of that age. I found one coach that would take her on. His encouragement, his kindness, his candor and humor, his patience has led her to make her high school golf team in her private school as an 11-year-old, Mark. Because this one coach took her on, changed her life. What would be your advice for youth coaches to really balance those kids that have the superstar, that have the competitiveness, versus those kids that may just be slower at developing those physicalities that you talked about, versus those kids like your son that are there for the snack and there to have a good time? What would be your advice for them balancing all of those different levels?
There's a fantastic book called Positive Coaching. And I would encourage every parent to be a part of the Positive Coaching Alliance. And the basic tenet is this. Number one, in youth sports, make sure they're having fun. They play because it's fun. Major League Baseball players play still because it's fun. If they didn't like it, they'd stop doing it, regardless of the money, right? Kids play because it's fun. The Positive Coaching Alliance is very, very interesting. And Phil Jackson, at the height of his coaching with the Bulls, read that book and instituted at the NBA level some of the things in Positive Coaching Alliance. Are they having fun? Are you encouraging? Are you rewarding, right? So rather than making negative statements, he always made positive statements. Rather than saying, don't do that, he always say, why don't we do this? So just some of those subtle differences. But I would say if you're a parent and you have a youth athlete, join the Positive Coaching Alliance. You will love it. And then read the book Positive Coaching that kind of spawned the Positive Coaching Alliance. But it's got so many things to say about just being present for your kids. Again, you don't have to have all the ability in the world. I'm glad you found a coach for your daughter, but if that's all it came down to, there was nobody, then mom or dad taking her to the range and just hitting balls or just playing 9 holes is better than. But the Positive Coaching Alliance is one of the most impactful things I've ever seen. And just the encouragement that you're getting kids, regardless of the score or the stats or who won or who lost, the encouragement, the self-esteem they're building. Just play, right? Have fun and play. That's the number one factor. And I would say we focus way too much on statistics. It becomes critical at the high school, collegiate, and professional level, but we focus way too much on statistics in youth sports. Just play. Don't fill their head with their batting average and their greens and regulation and all the stuff they get caught up on. They so bound up. Just sometimes I've had a really good golf coach say to me, stop thinking and just be an athlete. Hit the ball. Just be an athlete, right? And sometimes when you don't think about the small area you have to hit on the green and you're just like, look, I know my swing. I know how to make impact. Just make a good swing. That's all you need.
Yeah. So one of my next questions, as the players finish their time with you in college, Coach Mark, I was a collegiate cheerleader for the University of Oregon, and everyone likes to make fun of cheerleaders. But I tell everyone, if you want to hire someone that is cheerful, happy, encouraging, hardworking, that loves people, and will be one of the best salesperson you've ever seen, hire a collegiate cheerleader. And I will tell you, the ladies and males that I was cheerleading with have gone and crushed it in the professional world. So I would love for you to share a little bit about those players you see that do not make it to the NBA. Because let's face it, more parents need to understand the very, very small percentage of people that make it to the collegiate level and the minute number of people that make it to the professional level. We have to have skills and character that takes us to that next career level. What would your advice be to coaches, to parents, and to players of how sport can help them take it to the career level and past collegiate sports, or even after the professional level? I see a lot of players struggling after they finish professional sports because they don't know what to do with their life.
Yeah. I guess it's a little bit of a loaded question too, and I know not intentionally, but what we look at, if you're a youth football player, high school football player, you look at the NFL as the ultimate pinnacle of success. And when I speak to professional or college football teams, I tell them, okay, what's the highest you can get in your profession? And they all say NFL. And I say, how many of you want to make it in the NFL? Every hand goes up. And I say, let me tell you, the average NFL player is out of the league in 3 years. 60% are bankrupt and 60% are divorced. Does that sound like success to anybody in here? Does anybody want those three things right now? Raise your hand. No hand goes up. I was like, that's the pinnacle. So there's got to be something other than the highest achievement I can make in my sport. Not being a jerk would be one of them. Not being arrested, not being bankrupt, not being divorced, having a college degree, having something to fall back. Well, what's your plan A? Oh, professional football? No, that's a 3-year career, bankrupt, divorced at the end. That's your fallback. You better have a better plan than that, right? Because the averages say even the ones that make it to the NFL aren't going to finish as success. It's going to be an absolute miserable failure. That's the average. So you've got to have those parameters. 8 out of the 9 girls I had working for us in our first company, my partner and I, were collegiate soccer players. And they were extremely talented girls. They were smart. They were energetic. They were cheerful. They knew how to deal with people. They knew how to deal with failure. They knew how to handle rude people. They knew how to be nice to people that were rude. Because they were exposed to all these different things through sports. Sports is such a great launching pad for success in life. How many U.S. presidents played collegiate sports? Almost all of them in the last 40, 50 years, right? It's such a launching pad. It can be such a launching pad. I hate what's happened just in my lifetime to the culture of professional athletics because it's become so hard to look up to the majority of. There are great football players. There are great basketball, baseball, every sport. WNBA, there's so many great ones, but there's so many that are not. And that's the overwhelming narrative now that we look at our kids aspire to be at that level, and their role models at that level are terrible. Some of them are terrible human beings, and we don't want that, right? So it's that launching pad of sports is so critical. It doesn't mean you can't succeed without sports, but if your kid's not playing sports, they better be involved in music or theater or something that gets them out of the normal, go to school, do my work, go home, watch TV, do social media, right? Some other venue that gets them exposed to different cultures, different problems. And then, I look at how kids handle failure, right? In baseball, you're in the Hall of Fame if you fail 7 times out of 10. If you get 3 hits out of 10, you're going to the Hall of Fame. That's why I like baseball as a sport, especially for youth, because it teaches them how to fail consistently and not throw a bat, throw a fit, kick a ball, scream in the dugout at their coach, right? I want them to fail, 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 and watch how they fail. It's a great sport for that.
Yeah.
Whether they play it long term or not, get your kids playing t-ball, baseball, softball, and let them learn what failure is and how to handle it appropriately.
You just said something, Mark, that I thought was really interesting, and I want to just reverse for 1 second in my questioning here. There's so many parents that look to that D1 and that collegiate recruiting. Did you ever recruit a kid and it was a mismatch? Or did you ever have any advice as you were looking back and say, man, this would have been a really good mindset for that family to go into that collegiate recruiting so that it was the right match? Because I feel like so many families and kids just have that pie in the sky, excitement, where there may be a mindset going into collegiate recruiting that would create a really beautiful long match for the family and for the coach.
For sure, for sure. I mean, I was a D2 coach, but trying to recruit Division I talent, either academically or just didn't get the exposure, and I could get a Division I talent at the D2 level.
Yeah.
And we did that a lot, but parents get so caught up in Division I, D1 or nothing, D1 or nothing. A D2 is full scholarship. D3 is not a scholarship, but has excellent opportunity to play. I would rather have a kid go play for a D3 coach and pay their own way in a good environment where they actually get to play and get to perform and get to succeed than go sit on a D1 bench on a full ride and never touch the floor in 4 years. That's miserable. I mean, everybody wants to play. It's why you play as a little kid. You want to play. It's why most of the arguments parents have with coaches are about playing time, not performance, playing, to just get on the field, right? So a lot of times I would recruit kids who I really thought were better and could be at a D1, and they were getting recruited by a D1, and I was recruiting them. I say, you know what? You're probably right. You probably ought to take that offer. If Duke's recruiting you, I'd probably go to Duke. But at that same time, we were near the top of our league and playing in the NCAA tournament and playing for championships. And I'd have a kid who could probably go to a low D1 school, but they were going to finish with a losing record all 4 years. He maybe would get to play some or would get to play, but I knew their competitive drive. They'd never lost in high school, and to go to a 4-year program where they never won, never made it to the playoffs, they'd be miserable. I'd say, hey, look, if it's not me, think about a D2 where you can drop down and be at the top half of your league and keep winning like you've done your whole career in high school and be somewhat content. You can go play D1 and win 5 games a year, go 5-22, and you're going to be miserable. So those matches and then the right player with the right coach. There were players I recruited along the way that I really, really wanted, and then we got through the recruiting process and did a home visit, or they came and visited on campus, and we took them off our list, not because of their talent level, not because we thought they couldn't help our team, but the personality wasn't right. I was like, I'm not right for that kid, and that kid's not right for me. So let's move on to somebody else that maybe not as talented or as highly touted, but it would be a better fit for our program. Conversely, I got a lot of transfers out of that process. I sat down with a lot of moms and dads and players and told them the truth, good, bad, and indifferent. And they would go play somewhere else. I wouldn't get them. They'd go play somewhere else, get sideways with the coach or not playing time. And I'd get a call back after their freshman year and they say, hey, I want to transfer and play for you. And it was because during that recruiting process, the same thing I do in business, I always put their needs in front of my needs, and I tried to tell them the truth and what was best for them, regardless if it was best for me. If I thought it was better for a kid to go play somewhere else, I would tell him and the parents that. And I think people appreciated that, and they'd go have a bad experience or not work out, and they want to come back and play. And then I would get players. Sometimes I got referrals from players I had recruited who did not play for me, went and played somewhere else, but another kid came through that high school program. The parents knew that kid's parents say, whether you go play for that guy or not, you need to go through the recruiting process. And I ended up getting that player, and
Wow.
they weren't even on my radar. It was just it was from the recruiting process of a player I didn't get. So how we take people through that process is critical as well. It's the same thing in business. We take people through that
Mhm.
process, and maybe they're going to be with us for life in our company, or maybe they're not. But my goal is, if they're here for 2 years, then they leave a better person and a better employee for the next company than when they got here. So those things are critical.
Man, there's so much wisdom packed into that, not just in sports, but in how kids interview for their jobs and leaders that they should look to mentor from. Love that, Mark. That was amazing. So, as we finish up here, I have loved this conversation. I am just really excited that we had the opportunity to talk with you. My final question for you is, listening to all of the wisdom that you've given us, Coach Mark, there is a fine balance that we as parents have to put into the future, to vision, to manifest, to have a mindset, to have a growth mindset. That takes a certain type of parenting to create great athletes. But there's also a nurture and a fun component that we have to balance in all of this. And doing that takes a lot of work, and it's not always as easy as it sounds.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what would be your number one piece of advice for those parents listening out there that want to create super kids?
There's three components that I think are really important, not just for sports but for life. Number one, you have to earn your place at the table. So your son, your daughter, when you evaluate them, you don't evaluate them with a real good perspective. So the ability to pull back unemotionally and look at, for me, statistics and say, hey, I want my kid to play more, but they're playing baseball, they're hitting 124 and they make an error every other play. They're probably going to get the minimum innings in Little League, and me pushing the coach to get them more, I have to take a realistic view of whether they've earned their place at the table, right? I just have to be honest about it. Earning your place at the table means, hey, if you're hitting 124 and making an error the other play, if you want more, then we're going to have to go after practice and take grounders and do extra batting practice. I'm not going to push you to do that, 11-year-old. You're going to have to ask for it, or you're at least have to be excited and ask me for it, and we're going to go do it. So you have to let your kid earn your place at the table. The second thing you have to do is you have to learn and teach them to succeed beyond their own physical abilities, because that's the small part of it. You have to learn to do other things, how to think, how to strategize, how to have extra effort where your abilities aren't going to take you there. So earning your place at the table, succeeding beyond your own physical abilities is critical, and there's so many ways to do that. And really the last thing is how to never forget how you got there. I think that's what we see in a lot of professional athletics. They went in with this attitude of, I'm going to earn everything I get. I'm going to work hard. Whatever my physical abilities are limited, I'm going to achieve in other areas to overcome those shortcomings. And then they get there and they stop doing those things. And we see these careers just slide, right? They get a little out of shape. They don't report as well in shape. Their abilities aren't the same. They're not spending extra hours doing it. They get that big. We see it a lot in the NFL in free agent status, right? They get a huge free agent contract and their performance starts to drop, right? The worst thing you can give a human being is a salary, right? Put everybody on 100% commission and you'd have a much better workforce. What they get in the NFL is they get this set salary with this huge payday, and they invariably start. You know when they don't slide? You know when they have the best years of their career? The free agent year. When they're up for a new contract, they work their tails off. They didn't forget how they got to where they are. So that's kind of my mentality. I was blessed to have 9 All-Americans in 17 seasons. But my favorite players were walk-ons, because walk-ons did 3 things. They earned their place at the table. Nobody gave it to them. They earned it. They succeeded beyond their own abilities because they weren't talented enough to earn a scholarship, but they learned how to succeed anyway. And walk-ons never forget how they got to that spot. And 30 years later, when that kid is graduated and is running a business and has a Fortune 500 company, he's not going to get to the place where his pride and hubris lets him forget how he built that company, because he learned it in athletics as a walk-on. And he's going to continue to treat people the same way. He's going to treat his employees the same way. He's going to treat his staff the same way. He's going to treat his customers the same way. And they're going to continue to succeed because they learned not just how to earn their place, how to succeed, but they never forgot how they got there. Why do most Fortune 500 companies fail? It's not competitiveness, it's not technology, it's not business, it's hubris. They forget how they got there. They pride fills them up and they stop doing the things they did that got them there. So those would be my three.
Wow, coach, what a finale. What a mic drop moment. I mean, I know you have done major interviews with Tony Robbins and all the big personalities out there, and I cannot say thank you enough because this conversation
Pleasure.
going out to parents like me with little kids, this is where the difference maker is. If we can help the next generation of parents really understand how to parent smarter, nurture more, and watch for that zone of genius without pushing. So, coach, I can't say thanks enough for your time today. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been a pleasure. It's a lot of fun talking about the most important thing we have, which is our kids.
Absolutely. So, for those of you that want to parent smarter, please make sure that you like and share this episode with Coach Mark, and make sure that you connect to ihelpmoms.com, where we have 12 categories of parenting coaches that can help you with child behavior, with overwhelm, with making sure your marriage is intact, on the same page, so that you can have a lot of fun with your families and nurture the next generation in their zone of genius. So, thank you so much, you guys, for being on with us for creating super kids. See you guys next time.